Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rappin With ReefBum. I'm your host Keith Berkelhamer, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Deven Rich from Reef Dudes. Deven, man, welcome to the show. Deven has a very large social media following with over 29,000 subs on YouTube, over 27,000 followers on Instagram. He also has a strong presence on Facebook with the Reef Dudes Saltwater Reef Chat Board. So, Deven, man, it's like the interviewer is being interviewed here on Rappin With ReefBum. Thanks again, man, for being a part of this.
Oh, no problem. So how are you doing today, Keith?
I am doing excellent. We had a little snow here in Vermont. We missed the big nor'easter, but we got 5 or 6 inches of snow. Really not much of a winter yet here in Vermont, but I guess it's kind of gearing up. How are you doing, man?
Doing pretty good. We had our day or two of winter, then it kind of warms up and melts away. So it's kind of intermittent every couple of weeks. But yeah, overall, I'm doing pretty good, though.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in here. And we're going to have a lot of fun talking reef. And I got a bunch of questions for Deven. And I know you folks probably will have some as well. And see, we've got Vermont John is in the house. And Reef Keeper, welcome folks, 321 Reefer. Greg Carroll is back. Greg, what's up, man? So really wanted to talk with Deven about a bunch of things, and really wanted to kind of start off by getting more insight, Deven, in terms of your background and how you got started in this hobby. So what's the story there, Deven, in terms of how you got into reef keeping?
All right, so that's a very good question. So aquariums in general have probably been on and off since the younger days. Kind of, I guess, high school days, I was into aquariums, or elementary school, I don't know, sometime when I was younger. Completely got out of it for a while, and my current girlfriend at the time, had this little tank. I was like, oh, what are you doing with that tank? It's in a box, not doing much. I'm like, oh, can I have that? And that literally started the rabbit hole. So that first started as like a little freshwater tank, and then I started to turn into a planted tank, and I was obsessed with planted tanks for a year or two. So I had all these planted tanks, and I was like breeding little celestial pearl Daniels and shrimp and all these different things. And then one day I was like, I'm gonna try a reef tank. And I was like, how hard can it be? So I just emptied out one of the fresh tanks, turned into a saltwater tank, and I was instantly hooked. And then all the freshwater tanks just started turning into saltwater tanks, and then the rabbit hole just got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, and you just can't get out of it, can you?
Yep. Nope. You're in there. I'm in there for life. Like I don't even know what to do with myself if I didn't have a saltwater tank now. It'd be a void in my life.
So at what point in time did you start Reef Dudes? You know, after how many years in the hobby did you start that project?
I had a website, was probably still up. I think I called it Fish Tank Projects. I started doing that, and I started doing just random little how-tos and tutorials on freshwater stuff. So I was already kind of doing it. I think I had a couple random videos out, and I went to Reef Dudes, and I've been very entrepreneurial, and I've always had a bazillion little random projects on the go. Like I've never not done things, but I've always jumped from one thing to another thing to another thing. Never stuck with it. So finally one day I'm like, hey, Reef Dudes, I'm just going to stick with it. I was actually supposed to start it with a buddy. Then he bailed on me, but I just ran with it myself and just kept on building it. And yeah, so that was probably about a year or so in a saltwater, and then many years on the aquatic hobby.
So it really should be Reef Dude because the other guy bailed on you.
Yeah, he did, but I already bought the domain name, so I rolled with it.
Oh, there you go. All right. So what was behind? Was that pretty much what was behind it? Like two guys and two dudes, Reef Dudes.
Yeah, basically we were just gonna do one and just do different kind of things and teach stuff. And I don't know. I've always just trying to, like, the whole goal of the channel has always been to teach things and just make it entertaining and make it fun. And I've always been a very big DIY, and I like building things. I like taking things apart and figure out how they work, and that's kind of what started it. And I still do that, not quite as much now due to a lack of free time, but definitely still happens.
So as I mentioned in the intro, you got a really very strong social media following. What do you think has been behind that success in terms of having a lot of folks following on YouTube and Instagram and also Facebook?
The biggest thing is, like, everything I put out, I always try and make it somewhat educational. So teach something and make it entertaining. And I think honestly that's it. And consistency. I've done a video every week, just about every week for a couple of years now, and same with live streams. So just keep that consistent stuff coming. And other people I'm sure, are addicted as much as I am, right? So let's get that reefing fix.
So you mentioned live streams. What do you think in terms of the effectiveness and the content that you put out? Do you think live streams are near the top of the list? I mean, what's your goal with a live stream?
I just do them for fun. I don't know. I feel guilty if I miss one now because I do it every single Wednesday, right? So I honestly just feel guilty. And it's half the time, sometimes I bring on guests, other times it's just random topics, and sometimes it's just random Q&As, but I don't know. I feel guilty if I don't. But I like doing it. Partially, it's like a guilty way for me to learn new things. I can lure people on and learn something I want to learn about, and at the same time, hopefully teach other people or start those conversations to kind of like further the hobby more.
So let's also talk about the influencer out there. In terms of being a social media influencer, what do you think that role has? How have you kind of like fallen into that role, and what kind of challenges exist for you in terms of being an influencer?
I don't know if there's any really challenges per se. I mean, YouTube is literally like a second job. Like I feel like I have 2 full-time jobs doing YouTube, so it is a lot of work, and half the time I'm up until the wee hours of the night Sunday morning so I can edit a video and have it published for Monday morning. So it definitely is a lot of work, and I'm going to say the time commitment's the hardest thing, but just the fact that I feel guilty if I don't do it, I make myself do it, and I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people don't realize how tough it really can be to put out content on whether it's YouTube or Instagram. But there's a lot of work that goes into the shooting, the editing, the narration. It is not easy, and everybody has their different styles and all that sort of thing. But overall, it's not an easy gig.
Yeah. Well, even like we were talking earlier, even just doing a live stream, right? You're doing the same thing that I'm doing, right? We're the editor or the moderator, we're the talent, the videographer, like you're doing it all, right? So it's definitely...
Yeah, it's we are one man shows here, and it is a juggling act in terms of being that one that's the thing that always gets me is like trying to make sure technically things go off without a hitch. And if something happens and you're in the middle of having a conversation with a guest, then that's can be a little rough. little rough.
Yes, it does.
So you've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of folks in the industry. What, in your opinion, you've covered a lot of different things in terms of new product launches and innovations that are have been out and are coming out. But what do you think in terms of the most important story in 2020? And let's take COVID off the table because it's been a crappy year because of COVID. But for this past year, 2020, what's kind of like struck you as being one of the bigger stories in the reef keeping hobby?
This year, I think one of the bigger things is the whole auto testers, and I am a huge fan of not testing manually because I know I'm a slacker at it. So I'm a big fan of the auto tester. So I think that's been one of the bigger advancements, I'd say, this year.
And in terms of the pipeline coming for 2021 and beyond, any insight in terms of what we might kind of see in terms of innovation in the future?
The only one that comes hand I know for sure is coming out soon is Mastertronic. So I run the Alcatronic on my tank, and they're doing their own version that does automated titration testing, which can basically has a ton of vials and can do everything you want. So I'm kind of excited for that, just because right now I have the Algae tester on my big tank, but I still have to manually test the rest of it. So automating that will be pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think in terms of the automation, I have the GHL KH director, and that certainly is a godsend because measuring DKH is got to be the most important parameter, I would think, in terms of reef keeping and keeping it stable. So being able to test, I used to use a solid for test kit and test once a week, and hey, you were good to go. But now you can test it like 24 times a day.
Yep. Do you test your KHC that often?
Once a day. I do. How often do you do the Alcatronic?
I do it twice a day because that's the lowest it lets me.
Oh, really?
12 hours.
Yeah.
But I would happily do it once a day if it let me.
Yeah, I was doing it twice a day, but I cut it back to once a day. Just looking here in terms of the chat to see whether or not we have any questions going on here. We got
over 9K reef.
We got It's got a camera question there. You want to tackle that one, Deven? Or
yeah, a good budget-friendly camera for coral pics. Honestly, easiest thing is using just your cell phone and getting either orange or yellow filter. Like I use this yellow one a lot, or you could use orange glasses. Either one of those will cut down the blue and give you drastically better photos. If you do want to get something more specific, I don't know where it is in my room, but I have an underwater one. I think it's Panasonic, but it's underwater camera. I'll just dunk in the tank and put it 2 inches from the coral and get really cool close-ups.
What's your go-to camera in terms of your videos and shooting the tank?
I have a Sony a6500, and this is kind of my main one that I shoot with most of the time.
I've got a Sony a7 III.
Ah, nice. How do you like it?
I like it a lot. I used to be a Canon person. Yeah, I had the Canon Mark D 3, 5D Mark III. But video-wise, it was not where I needed it to be. So I made that jump from Canon to Sony.
I went from Nikon to Sony, mainly for that their autofocus is just hard to beat.
Yeah. I thought about the Panasonic, the Lumix, but I don't know. I think I read it had some issues in terms of the autofocus, in terms of the Panasonic camera as well.
Yep.
All right, so you put out a lot of content about your tanks, and you released a couple of videos recently. One about your display tank, which is a Waterbox Peninsula aquarium, and we do have something in common in that regard because I just started up my own Peninsula custom reef tank. So, but let's start with your Waterbox, and I pretty much, so for those folks that follow Deven on YouTube, but I think it was like a 12-minute video. I chopped it up to about 5 or 6 minutes. So there is a lot of stuff that I took out just for the sake of brevity, but we'll come back and talk about it. So it's just going to be Deven providing a 9-month update, I believe, of the Waterbox aquarium. So we will check that out, and we'll come back and we will talk about it.
What's going on, guys? Deven from Reef Dudes. Now the Waterbox tank is just nearing about 9 months old now, so I figure a little bit overdue and finally time for an update on it. So the tank is definitely aging and settling in. Now there has been a few little issues lately that we'll touch on in just a little bit, but overall the tank itself is looking pretty good. I still am running ozone, I get asked that constantly, and there's tons and tons of awesome clarity looking down the tank. and that is one of the main benefits and main reasons that I do run ozone. Just 6 feet of water, you can see right to the end, nice and clear, and everything just looks really good. Now, one sad thing did happen the other day. I did lose my gold torch the other day. It just one day's boop receded on me, no idea why. I have heard that does happen, so it's a bit of a mystery of what's going on there, but makes me sad. A little gap in there, I did love having that one. Now, this did kind of spur me to test my tank and kind of see what's up with everything. And there was one issue, my phosphates were certainly on the high side, so I've started to take some corrective actions to deal with that. The other big issue that may or may not be related is my pH has been very low lately. With the windows open in the summer, lots of fresh air, it wasn't an issue at all. But recently it's like 7.9 is my high, like it's been 7.7 something, like way too low. So I'm starting to work towards addressing that. The one other thing that's been really wacky lately is this guy. This is a meteor shower Cypastria. Generally they're pretty easy. I have 2 chunks in the tank. There is one that's hanging out of here, and this guy overall has been pretty good. However, this one has been receding for the past few weeks. I'm kind of slowly watching the flesh go up on it. I don't know why. It might be phosphate related, might be pH related, but either way we're working on fixing those 2 issues. The rest of the stuff in the tank is doing pretty well. Despite the higher phosphates, the acros are still encrusting, they're going well. They're not quite as vibrant as I'd like them to be, and that is definitely because of the nutrients. Now, a couple things that I've been doing to start to deal with it. I put on my AI Prime back on the tank for now. This one did grow Chaeto like crazy for me in the past. So I put that on here, and we're gonna let that hopefully supercharge the Chaeto a little bit more. So we're doing that. It already seems like it's starting to grow fairly well. Did that, of course, have my light shapers on here, mainly just to prevent algae. So I kind of directed them just so the light's not directly on the glass, or the acrylic rather. And this should help reduce some of the potential cornline algae or anything growing, or reduce the need to clean this. In the chamber in here, I did just change in some fresh carbon and also added some RoFos. So that's going to help pull back some of the phosphates as well, and we will get things back into a normal, happy level. So let that be a lesson to you guys. Make sure you guys are keeping up on your test kits. As life got crazy, I haven't tested mine in ages, and now I'm dealing with a bit of the fallout from it. The other thing I'm looking at doing is actually getting my second chamber for the CO2 reactor installed. Now it's a bit of a tight fit in here. The bottom is hitting the CO2 chamber. Now if I raise that up a little bit, it will stop that little, we got about an inch kind of flange around it. So that inch or 2 might just let me fit it in. So I'm gonna see if I can raise that up and then sneak it back a little bit further and see if I can just fit the second chamber in here. And if I do, that's gonna give the effluent more contact time with that media to help absorb it, which should also increase the yelk a little bit more, as well as absorb a little more CO2, which will help. Still doing my daily auto water changes, and I'm currently doing 5,000 mils a day. That's a little over a gallon. I might actually try raising that to about 1.5 gallons or 2 gallons, and we'll see how that affects kind of the tank and the nutrient levels and everything else. But I do think the majority of it's probably going to happen with the RoFos and bringing on the AI Fuge light back on here. When I do kind of tap into the airline, I think I'll remove the silencer as we won't really need it and see if I can connect directly to the skimmer intake line. I do have the ozone on here right now. That may come off later because I'm going to be adding the UV on. I don't know if I'll need both of them, so we'll see. But when I was putting this in earlier, I did kind of plan this one. I know there's a union on here, so I can pull it off and change it. And this valve is teed off my return pump, and that goes to my Geo's cryptic reactor, which is on the other side of this wall. So what I'm going to do is put a 90 on it, bring that line this way, install the UV right here, and then it will go from there, return pump, to the UV, come out into the cryptic, and then that will come back into the sump. Now I know that's not the ideal way to do it, but it's the best way I can kind of fit on the tank, and I think it will still work pretty well. Now another thing you might have noticed is I actually put on the G5 diffusers. So these were the easiest install of my life. They literally just magnet directly onto the light. So boom, it's off. They're like, oh, let me put my diffuser on. Installed. It's like 2 seconds. So that was the easiest install ever, and overall they're looking pretty good. Now, I don't think you need these on the G5. The G5 is blended very nicely already. And it's, I don't know, I'm back and forth. The G4s, I think they made a big difference. The G5s, the biggest thing I'd say is if I'm sitting at the dinner table, Looking at the tank, there's a bit less glare on it. That diffuse sheet kind of makes the lights a bit easier on the eyes. So that's the big difference versus seeing the LED diodes. So I'd say that's kind of like the biggest thing I've noticed. It does kind of blend the light a little bit better, and it definitely does subdue the bit of shimmer in the bottom of the tank. So if you like more not as crazy shimmer, you want to subdue it a bit more, or slightly less glare, then that's kind of a good route to go.
And we are back. There's a lot going on there, Deven.
Always.
I just want to acknowledge that we have a celebrity watching. Dan Marino is watching the live stream, and I am a huge Dolphins fan. So, yeah, go Dolphins, Dan. All right. Beautiful.
All right.
Yeah. So, a couple quick things. Have you ever measured par in that aquarium under the G5s?
I have. It's been a while and I don't fully remember, but I definitely have.
Okay. I was going to ask you in terms of how much the diffusers, cut back the par in that tank. But
it was very minimal.
Okay.
It's a couple percent of the par, but it's fairly negligible. Like you could just bump it up a few percent, and it's not really a big deal.
Gotcha. What else did I want to ask you quickly before we kind of dig into some stuff a little bit deeper? But multiple yellow tangs. Do they get along? How long have they been together?
They have been in there since I started the tank. I got 2 tanks from one person, or 2 tanks, so they're already together. And then I picked up a tank shutdown, which actually a majority of the fish came from. And so I kind of added them all at the same time. And, the first few days, week, there's a bit of bickering, but after that, they're fine. Like now they'll all kind of swim together and school together. And there's the odd little spiff thing, but like I'd say 95% of the time, no issues at all.
Yeah, I put in 4 tanks at once. It was actually out of necessity in the new Peninsula tank. I had a Frag tank. And a 50-gallon low-boy Frag tank, some of my viewers know, that sprung a leak. So I had to scramble. Luckily, it was like a slow leak, but I had to break down. I got 2 Frag tanks. I have one that's really like a graw tank, and another that I use really just for frags. So that Frag tank, I had to take all the frags and put into the graw tank, and I had 4 I had 4 tanks in that 50-gallon Frag tank. And there was a couple of tanks in the, there was a fox face and another tank in the other Frag tank. I was like, I can't do that. And I started my my new Peninsula tank. I think it was, I had added 4 chromis a week before that happened. And those were the first fish I had in that tank, which was about 2 weeks old. So, but the chromis were doing really well. I was like, I'm going for it. I'm just going to put those tanks into the new Peninsula. And, they so far, so good. Let's talk about, and I see Ray S. has this question, and this was a question that I wanted to talk to you about as well, Deven, in terms of flow in a Peninsula tank. So talk to us about what you've got going on there in terms of circulation. It's a mixed reef.
Yeah. So flow is 100% a bit of a challenge at Peninsula, especially if you're kind of OCD like me and you don't want any pumps on those 3 sides.
Yeah.
So at one point I was thinking about doing gyres on it. I ended up going for MP60s. So they are big beefy pumps, and they're currently running about 70 to 75%. So they're running pretty high. So it's a lot of flow I'm actually pushing through there, but it's such a kind of a broad chunk of flow. So you can kind of see the torches behind me waving around. So it's on reef crest. So it kind of goes up and down. The biggest thing is to make sure you mix up the flow. If you don't, if it's always pushing, then you'll get that weird bit of protein layer kind of build up at the end of the Peninsula, which is annoying. But if you have enough surface agitation, or sometimes, one pump runs a bit higher just so it circles it a bit, then you don't really get that. That's that was the only one little bit of hurdle, I'd say, is playing with the flow to make sure you don't get that protein buildup at the far end surface.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is definitely a big challenge in terms of Peninsula tank. Something that I knew about going into it, but I think, I have your tank is 6 foot long, right? Yeah, mine's 6 foot long, but it's also, mine is 3 foot wide, so it's 225 gallons. It's only 20 inches tall. I started with 4 MP40s, and mine is a bare bottom, but I just wasn't getting the the flow even at 100% on those MP40s.
Yeah.
So I swapped out 2 of the MP40s for MP60s. So now I have 2 MP60s and 2 MP40s all cranking.
It's a good challenge.
Yeah, all cranking at 100% on the gyro mode. So it's definitely. I had some plans for some nice clownfish going into that tank, but now I'm not sure. They might be holding on to something though.
Yeah. You're a bit higher. I'd mine at 75% on Reef Crest. You're a little bit higher than me, but not too bad. Now, so far there hasn't really been any issues with that. Like I'll see fish swim up right beside it and play with it, but I mean it cranks up and down constantly. But yeah, it's a good chunk of flow.
Vermont John.
You don't have a sand bed though.
No, I don't. You have a sand bed. Vermont John says he's got 6 MP40s on a 150 gallon. Wow, you're cranking. Is that an SPS dominant tank, Vermont John?
That's a in-house jacuzzi, I think, right there.
So talk about your decision to go with sand versus bare bottom. You just what's behind that? Your
aesthetics.
Aesthetics.
I just like the look of sand. My frag tank bare bottom, but the one in my living room, I just like the look of sand better at the end of the day.
Yeah, I have always had sand in my tank, so this is actually a first for me to you know, to have a bare bottom tank. But you know, I want, you know, my tank is going to be SPS dominant. There'll be a couple of like LPS in there, so I really, you know, felt like if I'm cranking flow at that one end, and I'm the same as you, I did not want to have any, you know, type of recirculating pump on any of the 3 viewing panels. So I just kind of felt like the kind of pumping power that I needed, sand was probably not going to be an option for me.
No, it's true. You can get away with it. I also noticed when I first started the tank, I had the pumps much lower. Then as the tank kind of settled in and all those fines worked them way through the filters, and I could slowly crank the flow up a little more over time. So I think it was only probably around 45-50% when I started. Now I'm up to 70-75%. So every couple of months I just up it a little bit more.
Talk about you know, having a rimless tank, and in terms of flow. Have you had, you know, issues in terms of water splashing over, or you kind of like got that you know, kind of all figured out?
You do, if you adjust your pumps, you definitely want to be there and watch it to make sure you're not like pulsing and creating a standing wave that peaks over the edge. Yeah. For sure. Honestly, the only thing that I really do is either fish jumps and splashes over the edge and I got to wipe it off, or when I'm magnet cleaning, it's got to go slow at that top couple inches. Below that, you're fine, but you've got to go slow at the top, or otherwise you can easily.
Now you don't get to any salt creep going over the rimless tank in certain spots, or?
Not really. Maybe like every few weeks, I'll take a chunk of paper towel and just give it a little quick wipe around, just get back to shiny and pristine. Aside from that, nothing overly that I do about it.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you in terms of lighting. So you're using the Radeon Gen 5s. So how are those comparing to the you were using the Gen 4s before?
Yep. I actually have the Gen 4s on the frag tank beside me.
Okay.
So the biggest difference is like they're both amazing lights. The Gen 4s are more concentrated downwards. So I'm going to say you're going to get a little more par and penetrate deeper with the Gen 4s, where the Gen 5s, they spread the light out more. So you get more width-wise coverage, but a little less par because you're spreading it out instead of pushing it straight down as much.
Right.
You do get a bit better blending, or less caustics, I guess you'd say, with the Gen 5s. You don't get the disco-y as much. I had the Gen 4s with diffusers, and it was very subtle. I'd say the Gen 5s is like having diffusers on the Gen 4s, if not slightly more blended. Those are probably the biggest differences, I'd say. But other than that, they're pretty similar.
So Vermont John is saying, this is my first time with a rimless as well. Nervous about longevity. Purchased a CAD. Not sure what that is.
Or Cade. It's a brand of aquariums.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yep. Reef Keeper, the acrylic lid on a rimless tank helps keeps the water when using the flipper scraper. When it's off, you got to go slow.
Yep.
Yeah.
That top couple inches.
Have you ever had nets over your tank to keep fish from carpet surfing?
Yep. No, I have a top on my tank. I leave one on pretty much all the time.
Oh, do you? Yeah. You know, I have never used a nylon net for my tanks. I mean, my tanks are Euro braced, and I think the Euro bracing does help in terms of the carpet surfing. I had I've got a Chaeto wrasse. Thank God I still have him. He's jumped twice now. And one time he jumped and I came downstairs and he was on the floor, kind of dried out. And I was like, oh man, those are great wrasse. I mean, that was like my favorite wrasse. So I just picked him up and put him in the tank. And somehow he came to life and you know, lived. And then like, then I bought a nylon net for a top. And I never opened it up. I never took it out of the package. And sure enough, that wrasse jumped again. But this time I was sitting right there, on my desk right in front of the tank, so I was able to scoop him right up. And knock on wood, it's been a couple of years, and he hasn't tried it again.
Yeah. So, okay, two good stories out of this. Well, one not quite as entertaining, but so ironically, for my frag tank, I bought a mesh top, and I still haven't made it and put it on yet. And I do have a yellow chorus wrasse, so thankfully he's not took the leap of faith out of there. Now, with the other one, I had a cleaner wrasse. I eventually put a top on the tank. I learned my lesson. But he jumped out 3 times, and I kept putting him back in, and he kept being fine. And then one day I walked downstairs and he's like on the floor covered in like dog hair. My dog's like stiff and gives him a lick and stuff. And it's like, so I take all the fur off, put him back in the tank, swims around. I just started calling him Terminator because he was like a survivor. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, that stuff is just, I mean, the one thing I can't understand is how a fish can survive the impact of a fall like that. Isn't it like jumping out of a 10-story building for a fish? I mean, how do they survive the fall? I mean, mine landed on tile, not carpet, so it could not have been a pleasant feeling to be smacking on that cold tile.
Yeah, no, not at all.
So in terms of the lights, what are you running in terms of a light profile? It seems to be on the blue end of the spectrum.
It is more white. The camera doesn't pick it up as well. So how I have my light set, I have something similar to an AB Plus as the overall schedule. And then for about 4 or 5 hours of the day, I amp up all my whites to do it much warmer spectrum. So from about noon to 4 p.m. roughly, it's fairly hot on the toasty side, and the rest of the day, it's more of an AB Plus type of a look. But I'm just pulling up my lighting profiles. We'll see if it focuses. So if anyone does want to copy it, I did do a video on it, and I did post it all, but you can kind of see. So ramps up pretty high, and then there's about 4 or so hours of more intense light, and then it drops back down to AB Plus-ish. And I got a decent ramp up and down either side of it.
Yeah, nice.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's the whole thing with LEDs. This is my my first go, with an LED lighting over a reef tank. And man, let me tell you, it is complicated. I mean, it's not like the old plug and play with the metal halides and the T5s. I mean, you've actually got to think about this stuff, and it can be dangerous, right? I mean, you can tinker too much.
Halides to Mitras, how is the transition so far?
So far, so good. I'm digging them. I mean, coverage-wise, they're awesome, and I've got 6 of them over the Peninsula tank. So I'm going to actually be putting out a video on it next week, and I've got some really great par readings out of the Mitras. So yeah, I mean, there's no shady spots. There is the Mitras are just a very well engineered light, and it's been really good. But right now I don't have any corals in there, so really the proof will be in the pudding in terms of how the corals perform under those lights. But I'm going to be running a blue spectrum that I'm used to seeing with my my halides and T5s, and it's tough because I've got the tanks in the same room. So when I'm looking at my 400 watt 20K uraniums, which are really like very crisp white with a hint of blue, and then I pivot around and I look at the LEDs, it's like, wow, that's like a blue wave I'm getting hit by there. But then you start looking at it and you kind of stare at it for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like, all right, that's not so bad, but it's something different.
It is. And I'm always torn because I appreciate both. I like the white, crisp, vibrant look, and I do like the blue color pop as well. So that's partially why I have different chunks of the day and different spectrums to go through it all. Yeah.
Just looking to see what folks are saying in the chat here again. Well, I got some more questions, Deven, in terms of your calcium and alkalinity supplementation. So I saw the calcium reactor, and we're going to take a look at the Frag system. But have you dosed 2-part in the past, or have you just always been a calcium reactor person?
Nope, used to do 2-part. I've probably tried every dosing method out there. Currently on the Frag tank, I'm just using Kalkwasser, which is taking me way further than I expected it would. And then on the main tank, just calcium reactor more or less, and I'm dosing some trace elements on the side.
Now, in terms of anything, are you dosing anything to supplement the calcium reactor that you've got in the main display? Are you dosing any trace elements?
Yep, trace elements I am. I purposely didn't dose anything except for the calcium reactor for the first few months, and so I could do an ICP test and see what it was lacking and not giving me. So there's like strontium and like molybdenum, and there's certain elements that were low. So I've started to dose just some kind of trace elements on top of it just to fill in those gaps.
Now let's dig into a little bit about pH, and you've put out some videos about pH. You've had some live streams about pH, and you've had some challenges with your tank. And I think part of it, right, is because of the calcium reactor and the CO2 and what the impact on the pH is when you're injecting CO2. So just talk about your journey, I guess, in terms of trying to combat this pH issue, and you've been talking about doing a few different things, right? You've talked about running an airline from outside into the skimmer intake, right? You're talking about an air exchange unit. What's going on? What's the latest and the greatest in terms of your battle with the pH?
All right. So during the summer, windows are open. It's doing pretty good. Not a big deal. It starts getting cold out. Shut all your windows, and also my pH is like just tanks on me. So I'm like, hey, this is I need to deal with this. I think at one point my low was down to like 7.7 or 6.7 or something super low, which is way too low for me. Anything under 7.8, I'm like, hey, gotta deal with it. So I added a second chamber to my calcium reactor full of like finer media to soak up more pH. With the refugium, I'm running, dripping that into the refugium as well. I might try dripping into the calcium reactor. That's something that Chris said on my live stream the other day.
Yeah.
I ran an outside airline, but basically up in the wall to my attic because the tank's kind of in the middle of the house, so straight outside is not an option. But doing that, actually, it's basically outside air up there. So that made a decent difference. And then I took it another level further and built a big soda lime reactor and put that on the intake. So that's where I'm currently at. I'm also looking at an air exchanger for the house to drop the CO2 in the whole house, which is good for me and the tank. So it's good for everyone in the house. So that's kind of the next step. And this is getting extreme, but I'm also looking at doing a hybrid kind of. So, people do recirculating a reactor through the skimmer to re-scrub the tank air. So I'm going to do kind of a hybrid method of that, where I'm going to do that as well as sucking outside air. So it's going to be like kind of like a half and half. So I'm hoping that will do it. And then with the air exchanger, and I'm also debating dripping some of the other nasty stuff in there to bond the hydroxide atoms and boost it some more.
So with the other steps you've taken thus far, where's your pH kind of gone to in terms of the range? How much has it increased?
All right. So what are we at? What's today? Today, the minimum 7.92, average 8, maximum 8.1. But if I click back, let's go to like late October, and minimum 7.66.
Wow.
Average 7.8, max 7.9.
That's pretty good.
So my old max, my old high point is my new low point. So it's been a decent improvement.
Have you thought about at one point going back to two-part because of the challenges you've been facing, or you just figure that the steps you've taken now and the air exchanger, you're all in on the calcium reactor?
I'm all in. Calcium reactors are just so stable, right? If I look at my alkalinity, it just keeps the tank so stable, which I think is very important as well. Yeah, like my elk test from the last few tests, like 8.4, the one before 8.27, 8.39, 8.4, like it just keeps it so stable, which is important. Yeah, I don't know if I don't get it. And it's so cheap to run. Like once you have it, it's like dirt cheap to run. You fill it full of media, you ignore it for like a year.
Right.
Until you got to top it off.
Right.
Again.
And you're running the Versa dosing pump with the effluent to just dial that right in.
That's the best part. So I have the Alcatronic, which tests my tank every 12 hours. I have the Versa. So literally I'm sitting here and, every couple of days I'll look at it. And if I'm trending up or downwards, I open my app. I'm like, oh, okay, add one more mil to the Versa. Okay, I'm done. Look at my trends next few days. Like it's just so easy to tweak it now.
The Alcatronic, you can actually control your calcium reactor, right? So you're not doing that?
No, I've never done that. So you can control it has like a Wi-Fi or a Bluetooth outlet that it can control based off your reading. So if you're testing every 2 hours or so, you could have it turn it on or off based on that.
Right.
but I tend to just tune it so that it just keeps it stable. Dano's Reef, what medium am I using? I have a special blend of, because it's a really big reactor, I had to fill it. I got 2 little fishies reborn, I got Carib Sea Arm, and Brightwell has one called something or other that Lazarus, I think is called. So I have 3 different types of media in there, so it's definitely a special blend.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I'm kind of like in the same boat in terms of you know, the 2-part versus the calcium reactor, and I've been running, you know, 2-part on my 187-gallon tank, which is, you know, been going for 3 years plus right now, and doing really well. And my pH, you know, for that tank averages like from 8.4 to 8.1 as a low, which is nice. Good because, you know, I have the tanks here in a finished basement, and in the wintertime, the windows get sealed shut. And, you know, so it definitely the pH drops in the wintertime for me. You know, so on the new tank, I am going to be running a calcium reactor. And that's got me, you know, worried a little bit in terms of the pH, but in the past, I've always run a you know, a Walser with the calcium reactor to try to elevate that pH, and I've always had dual chamber calcium reactors to kind of help you know, absorb the extra the CO2. So that's my plan with this new tank, and yeah, and in fact, Greg Carroll turned me on to this Reef Octopus, this new Reef Octopus calcium reactor with a Varios pump, and he has a single chamber one, but I just started running this new dual chamber one, and you know, I don't have any corals in the tank right now. I think the only thing that's consuming any calcium and alkalinity is the coralline algae in there on the rock.
Yep.
So, you know, it's a really low demand at this point, and the pH is not an issue. But, you know, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm definitely going to be getting an air exchange unit installed soon, very soon.
I love the extremeness of it all.
What's that?
That I love the extremeness.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, I had Adam from Battle Corals on here, and he was like the guy that kind of put that bug in my head. You know, he said he saw a world of difference when he was able to elevate his pH, and one of those, I think he's got several air exchange units, made a big difference in terms of getting that up there.
Yeah, all that surface agitation is going to make it, the air is going to equalize with the CO2 is going to equalize with the tank water, with the air in the room as it agitates and does an oxygen exchange. So if you have high CO2 in your house, it's going to work its way into the water, which is going to raise those carbonic acid in your water and lower your pH. So if you can get rid of the CO2 in the surrounding air, then it's just going to increase in the room because it's going to equalize with it over time. So it's definitely more of an extreme thing. But if you think about it, if your CO2 concentration in your house is too high, it's really not good for you either, right? You're more alert, you're more awake with lower CO2 values. So it's good for you as well. So it's a good excuse to sell the wife on it if you need to, and then get it in there. But it's good all around.
You mentioned in one of your, I think, live streams with Mike Paletta that he suggested a CO2 meter. Did you end up investing in one of those, and what did you find out?
I sure did. So outside air is roughly 400 ppm. The house kind of bounces anywhere from, I'm going to say, low end would be 6 something, but on average I can say it's 700 to 900. You know, sometimes it gets up to 10,000, 11, 1,200. So it really depends how many people are around, and people are breathing around the tank and the living room and everywhere else. But so the closer you can get to outside air, the better. So
Vermont John is asking, why not get air for your skimmer from outside? I think you are doing that right now. You know, I tried doing that, and I did not see a difference in my my pH. But
I would say at about a 0.1 boost. Now, one thing to look, it might be worth getting a CO2 meter and seeing what your ambient CO2 air is. Because if it's already low, then air exchanger might not give you a ton of benefit, right? But if it's high, then it will.
So what do one of those meters cost?
It was about $100. There's cheaper ones, but all had shoddy reviews. The one I got was somewhere around $100.
All right, you'll have to send me a link. Because I don't want to be investing that kind of money if I don't have. Well, I think I have an issue, but we'll.
Or you just put that $100 towards your air exchanger and just do it. Regardless.
Yeah, there you go. Just go all in. Vermont John, BRS told me that even during extreme cold weather, getting air from the outside is not a problem, but I guess CO2 in the house will still be an issue.
You betcha. In the winter, windows are all closed, baby's sealed up, you're definitely gonna not have as good ambient air exchange. And then the other consideration is an air exchanger. If you live somewhere cold, it's called an HRV, which is a heat recovery ventilator. And it mixes the warm air through like a little radiator with the cool air to pre-warm it, so it makes it more efficient. So you're not just pumping cold air in your house. So they're 85-ish% efficient. But doing active air exchange is much higher benefit than a passive air exchange, which is just having the window open, because you're forcing that air in and out and making sure, you know, keeping the air fresh in the house.
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm definitely excited to kind of see what kind of difference it makes in terms of the pH on my tanks, for sure. So Deven,
Yep.
We also have some clips of your frag tank, and that's a relatively new frag tank, right?
Yep. A couple months
Okay.
old.
So there's a lot going on in that tank, and again, I took a snippet of the YouTube video you put out, the last YouTube video update you did on that frag tank. So we're gonna take a look at that snippet, and then we're gonna come back and talk about some of the stuff that's going on in that tank. So
Sounds good.
let's roll that tape. Hang on one second here.
What's going on, guys? Deven from Reef Dudes. Now, I'm way overdue for an update on the frag tank. I've definitely had a few little hurdles getting everything set up. I know we did kind of the bare bottom setup on this, moved everything in, and at first I had a bit of dinos in the tank. So what I did to kind of partially combat that was use a bit of Dr. Tim's waste away, a little bit of peroxide, and I overfed the tank like crazy on purpose to boost those nutrients up. Now, the fallout of that is the dino went away, but then a couple weeks later, boom, whole tank was full of hair algae, bits of Borapsis. It was looking pretty bad. So tons and tons of algae in there. Just because I had a bit of Borapsis as well, I decided to bring out the big guns, and I got some fluconazole. Now, if you guys haven't used that before, it is an antifungal medication, and it works amazingly well of getting rid of hair algae or Bryopsis. So I added that to the tank, and I actually did a double dose of it. And I let the tank sit for about 2 weeks before I turned the skimmer or anything back on. And 2 weeks later, absolutely pristine, not an ounce of algae in the tank. So that stuff does work very, very well. Now overall, I'm gonna say things are looking pretty darn good in the tank. The only one thing is I do have a little bit of dino back, so it's a little bit of a vicious cycle, and dino's a bit of a pain. Now I did already take my UV and put it on the Waterbox, otherwise I would just throw it on this tank and let it do its thing. So one thing that I have been doing now is starting to dose just a little bit of 3% hydrogen peroxide, and this actually does help with the dinos. And I think in the near future I might actually get another UV and just put it on this tank and just be done with it and not even worry about it. So once I get rid of that bit of dino in there, I think we'll be back to a happy place. Now the corals themselves are actually all looking really awesome, so getting lots of good growth in there and everything looking pretty happy. Gear-wise is an interesting one to talk about too. So as you guys know, I went with the GHL as the main controller on this tank, and so far so good. It is definitely a little trickier to set it up until you get your head around the way they do things, and once you do, then it's not too bad. And I actually did just pick up expansion cards. This is a pH and redox card, so we'll get that installed today. So we'll have to pop that open, install the expansion card. That's mainly just so I can use the ORP probe in the sump, and then for the future calcium reactor, once that's rolling, then that will be another way to control it. Now on the flip side, I also have been testing out the Hydros. So Coral View Hydros, that's been quite a bit of attention around it, fairly new controller. And got the little Wi-Fi power bar there, so this has been up running as well. So it is kind of crazy overkill running 2 controllers in tandem, but it's a good way to test subject it. Now with the Hydros, the few sensors that I got so far, I do have a water level sensor down there. And if that one ever gets too high, it'll shut off the filter roller, shut off the skimmer. Might even make it shut off the Clarity, or not the Clarity, the turf scrubber. Also another one, I really love the sensor. I have the little skimmer saver, whatever it is, from Auto XP Aqua, and it's in the skimmer in my big tank, so if the cup's ever full, I'll shut it off. So super cool to see Hydros teaming up with them and using some of their sensors because they work really well. So I love that goes right through the cup. So hasn't quite triggered it yet, but we'll test this one out pretty soon. We'll hopefully hit it. Same thing, Clarity. So a few different things. Basically the stuff on this half of the tank, I am running off the Hydros. The other one I'm going to hook up to is the leak sensor, which I think is super cool. Either just put it around the base of the sump or the base of the sand. I just gotta find a nice way to like tuck it in there and use that. So if anything does trip it off, I'll get an alert, can have it shut off the skimmers, or it pumps potential stuff that is causing a leak. Not too much fancy for control there, but I also got the NIOS on there. So those are kind of the 4 things running. Move that over later. We have the pH probe and the temperature probe and all that jazz on here as well. So it is kind of cool to be able to see both controllers, compare things, make sure everything's all good and happy. Now the HydroSap itself has been pretty solid so far. I love that interface is wireless with the Alcatronic, so I can see what my elk is, I can see what my pH is, and all my sensors and stuff right out the front. So I do actually got to put the other 2 in there. So far this is a Clarity and the Skimmer programmed, and the rest are just always on, but I just installed that, so I'll set that on a timer.
And we are back. Yeah.
Welcome back.
Looking pretty awesome there, Deven, in terms of that tank. So you got a lot of things going on there. It's been kind of an odyssey, right? You got the dinos. You've been battling them, and so it's we were talking like during the clip, you and I. It's kind of like a vicious cycle, because you kind of like you snuff one problem out, and then another one kind of like pops up.
Yep, keeps it interesting, right?
Yeah.
In one aspect, it gives me an excuse to attempt different methods and different different ways of dealing with things. But yeah, definitely a bit of thing. And if you might have noticed, I'm a little bit of a gear junkie, and I love automating things. So
in terms of the dynos, what do you think is going to be the ultimate? How do you ultimately think you're going to win that battle? I mean, UV and nutrients, is that kind of like your game plan?
This tank, more or less, yes. In the past, like I had dinos on my Waterbox tank before as well, and that one I did the Dark Tim's Waste Away, did some vodka dosing with it to use the bacteria to fight it, and I made a few things angry during that process, but I got rid of it and I beat it and I was happy. In my last lagoon tank, I had a bit of dinos for a while, so I probably just transferred over them when I upgraded the tank. And I did that, and I did actually I just threw UV on there and got rid of most of the dinos, moved the tank, everything was happy for a while, then I came back eventually. So I actually did get another UV that I am going to throw on this tank just as preventative, just so I don't have to deal with it, because to be honest, I'd rather just not deal with it. But now what I did in the past, I don't know what I did. I think I just used Waste Away and a bit of carbon dosing to get rid of them. And I also was upping my nutrients, so then I purposely overfed way too much food to boost my nutrients up. And the dinos went away, but then I had hair algae and bryopsis and a bunch of other nasty algae that took off. So then I did a bit of fluconazole, which is like magic for algae like that. 2 weeks later, tank's pristine, but then like a few days later, dino came back. So now I'm dealing with the dino. So I'm almost there.
Yeah, it is a battle, and you got to be persistent. Did you do a double dose of the fluconazole?
I did.
Yeah, a while ago, I did a single dose of the fluconazole, and the bryopsis did not reappear for a long time, but it did eventually come back after 4 or 5 months, for me. But I did not do that double dose. But I know a lot of folks that do the double dose, and it never does come back. But I think there's also you got to be careful in terms of not sanitizing, but making sure that things in the tank are cleaned properly, so that you don't reintroduce the bryopsis, after the treatment.
Yeah, as reading stuff with Vermont John, I decided to get the UV after I watched you. It was on the fence. So I've been in the hobby for years, never used UV, and I wanted to try it for ages now, because I've always used ozone mainly for water clarity. And like I had dinos, did beat it. And when I had that other UV, ironically, I threw it on my little lagoon tank that I used to have. And, after a couple of weeks, it got rid of the dinos. So I was like, oh, UV does work pretty well for that. And then I moved it to my big tank. And then, of course, a few weeks later, dinos came back. So I was like, whatever. So I ended up just getting a second UV, just a smaller one. I'm going to let it run on one of my return lines just permanently, just as preventative. Clarity-wise, both of them give you awesome clarity in your water, either UV or ozone, but UV has a benefit of killing, some of the bacteria and just being preventative. So seems like a good benefit.
Greg's asking you how much of the hydrogen peroxide you're dosing.
A scientific glug. I was watching the videos like, oh yeah, I haven't dosed it today. So I literally just go, bloop. I keep thinking I should put on a doser, but I just use 3%. The general recommended dose is 1 mil per 10 gallons. My tank's roughly 150 gallons beside me, so I'm just like, so I haven't measured, but 1 mil per 10 gallons is the general recommendation.
Have you started your tanks traditionally with dry rock, or have?
Yeah.
Okay, so was that also true with the frag tank, or did you use some seasoned rock from the display to kind of help seed that tank and start it up?
So this tank has no sand. There's very minimal rock in it. The rocks that are transferred are whatever had coral growing on it. Most of my filter media is I have the eShots BioLux, those cubes. I have the Bright Whale bricks, and I think I have a marine clear block in there as well. So I had a bunch of those media that I had on my previous tank, and I also threw some in the water box for a while. So I had a bunch of seeded media from 2 different tanks. That's all in my sump. So that's the majority of it that I brought it in. Now this is also my first bare bottom tank I've done as well. So I know that always adds a few little hiccups in when you're first starting a new tank.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it a lot on my live streams and my videos, but I've only had one tank that I started. It's actually my 187-gallon tank that I started with dry rock, and yeah, it was. I got dinos and bacterial bloom and diatoms and some serious cyano after I knocked out the dinos, just like you. You know, I mean, well, I don't know if you got the cyano, but I just, something else popped up opportunistically after I got the dinos out of there. And so with the new 225-gallon Peninsula tank, I just started that with live rock. And yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts in terms of, BRS and Tidal Gardens have done some videos on this whole negative space aquascape, the NSAs, and I mean, it's really cool looking and all that stuff. I mean, it definitely takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of advantages to being able to craft a tank with dry rock. And I know Greg is probably going to comment about he's had no problems at all with his dry rock only startup tank, but I have not been as fortunate, but what are your thoughts in terms of using the dry rock and all the different kind of aquascaping you can do with that? I mean, does that plus outweigh the disadvantages of some of the lack of biodiversity?
Okay, so live rock is definitely easier and you have less issues starting with it. My very first saltwater tank ever was a bunch of live rock I bought off somebody that had a cycle of the fish in it sitting in a big tank in his basement. And everything was pretty darn smooth for me. So my experience with like live pre-cycled rock definitely goes a long way. Even with dry rock, I pre-cycle it still, so it's not fully dry by the time it's in the tank. Usually I'll throw it in a brute for like a month or so and use some cycle bacteria and like do it. So it's not 100% dry. Like it is, but it isn't. You don't quite have that biodiversity. Now the advantage of the dry rock is you can get a lot cooler with your aquascapes, right? So it partially depends on the style you like. I know they have the whole NSA things or negative space aquascape, so it's not a big rock wall, but it's a lot more open space with tiny little branches going everywhere. I've kind of did something in the middle. Like a lot of my rock in the tank behind me on the water box is the Marco Rock shelf rock. I use that in a bit of the base, and I kind of just made my own funky, weird structures. And I spent like a month on that. Like I had the rock way before I had the tank. Yeah, oh yeah. I was out there and like every day I go out and tweak it and take it to some more. It's like literally like took me ages to do it. But I just constantly kept tweaking until I had something really cool that I liked. So
yeah,
now
go ahead.
I was gonna say now the only one big thing I'd say with the NSA ones is you don't really have a lot of the proper like fish caves and stuff. Right. And if you're heavily stocking a tank, usually if there's aggression, it's over territory, or okay, the little caves or cubby holes, or lack of food, right? So if you're feeding well everything else, I find that it doesn't have as many little hidey holes for the fish. Like again, once it's fully grown with the corals and everything else, there's a lot more nooks and crannies. But if you just have, like a bonsai tree, there isn't really many caves and stuff in there, which isn't as good for the fish. So you kind of got to take that into consideration when you're building it. Make sure you have all those little homes throughout the aquascape as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, really neat in terms of what you can do with that stuff, and I just love the look. I just wish you could do that with live rock, I mean, that would be just so cool. And I did kind of like contemplate that. I was like, I reached out to Joe Caprietta at Unique Corals. I was like, and he also is got a stake in Marco Rocks. So I was like, Joe, is there a way I could possibly do this that, potentially do some cool aquascaping with, you know, using the mortar that you guys have, and just try to like do that with the live rock. But you know, it would entail, you know, having the rock having the rock out of the water for a few hours, probably some die off, and it would be a challenge. So I ultimately just decided to go the old fashioned route with the live rock and just you know, do some strategic stacking and lock the rocks together. And so I didn't use any putty or any super glue.
You can use some of those mortars underwater,
Yes,
but it's messy.
Yeah.
And it generally gets like a bit of a film on your glass you got to clean. I've done it, so you can definitely glue stuff underwater, but it's a lot messier with the tank and everything else. If you do it though, I would 100% recommend taking all your creations and throw it in a brute and heater and some flow, and just dose a bunch of good bacteria to pre-cycle it as well.
Dano's Reef said he was able to actually do that with live rock. Did lose some of the microfauna. Yeah.
You probably will. Like you could escape it in the tank. You could pull it out and, you know, strategically glue stuff and just keep it wet. Don't let it dry out. And you will lose some, but you won't lose it all. You could just sprinkle your tank water on it constantly. But
let's change the subject a little bit here and talk about additives and supplements. What do you use, and what's been your experience with you know, those types of additions to the reef tank?
Which ones of many? Yeah. All right. So if you do big regular water changes, you can get away without adding much to it. If you don't do a lot of water changes, you're eventually going to deplete a lot of the macro supplements in your tank, which is like trace elements and other things. So if you do lots of big water changes, probably not an issue. But eventually you're going to run out. And most people don't test this stuff. Like if you do an ICV test, you know, every 6 months or so, and something's crazy low, then you're like, okay, maybe I should start dosing this. So I think that's one consideration. Now, like I dose, but on my lagoon tank, I was dosing ESV, which has a ton of stuff in it. So I think I was pretty much covered for trace elements there. On a calcium reactor, I know there's lots of stuff I'm not getting, right? You get all the coral building stuff, but you're not getting all the stuff that helps build the flesh. Like that stuff's not in the media. So there's certain elements that you're going to have to replace in that respect. Like I know potassium, and there's a few other things when I just did the last test that I was low on, so I had to dose a bunch to bring it back up. I've kind of been dosing on the frag tank. I've only been doing calc. I haven't even tested or checked or done anything with trace elements yet. It's still a new tank though, so nothing is likely depleted at this point. The Waterbox is like 9-10 months now, and that one I just actually got an ICP test back, and there's a few things that were low, so I did dose those to bring it back up. But I have been underdosing some of the Brightwell trace elements recently, and I'm doing less than half of what the recommended dose was and not nearly as frequently, and I knew that on purpose, but I kind of want to get a baseline of where things are at with that. So it kind of gives me an idea now, okay, I'm going to start dosing it, and I finally just got a few more Versas, so whenever my little adapters and a few pieces come in, I'm going to put them all in the doser and get that dialed in.
What about aminos or coral feeds? Do you dose any of those?
Randomly. When I think about it. So I have a whole slew of different ones. Now I will literally just like randomly dose them. I should probably do it like daily and stuff, but I do have some friends that just swear they can tell an instant difference when they stop dosing their aminos. Have I tried Replenish? I am sponsored by Brightwell. I have Replenish. Oh yeah, the trace elements. Yeah, that's actually the main one I dose. But I have the Replenish one, which is a mix of trace elements. Like I have Brightwell's one, I have Pull-Ups Lab ones, I have Red Sea, I have a ton of random ones, and I'll just like randomly pick and use ones. So Friday's the spice of life.
There you go. Yeah, I have not really had much luck dosing like coral, you know, like amino acids and whatnot. It seems like every time I dose amino acids, I'll get an algae outbreak. I have used the...
You need to dose less aminos.
I was cutting back and I wasn't really going too nuts with them, but it just seemed like my tank was kind of like at that limit where I was dosing some, you know, even a little aminos, and was just causing that kind of reaction. I have used the Reef, you know, Nutrition, Oyster Feast, and Roti Feast with a lot of success. So
those are good.
Yeah,
I have those as well. Those are my lazy day feedings, and I don't want to use frozen, like I usually use frozen food as the main staple when I'm feeling lazy, or sometimes I'll just randomly use some of the Reef Nutrition ones because they're good broadcast feed for corals and fish alike. So.
Yep. So Vermont John is talking about doing 2.5% water changes daily, and hoping that plus the KW and 3-part dosing will be enough. So what percentage are you doing in terms of the water changes? You're doing the automatic water changes, right? What does that come out to a percent basis on a weekly basis for you? Do you know?
That is about 2.5 gallons a day out of 200 gallons, so 1.25% a day, or 30%. No, 0.3. Yeah, I'm doing 10,000 mils a day, so that's about 2.5 gallons roughly, a little over 2 gallons a day.
Yeah. All right. So water changes are part of your routine there.
Yeah, the frag tank hasn't had a single one yet. The Waterbox does get them, but I have a lot of tangs, a lot of big fish in there, so that one needs a little more love on the nutrient side.
Let's also talk about nutrient exports. So we saw the Chaeto, and I think we also saw the you're using GFO or Roofos as well. Have you found that the Roofos can impact the Chaeto growth because it's pulling out some of the trace elements that's needed by the Chaeto? Have you been running that stuff at the same time or at different times?
No, I do have Roofos and or GFO or both in there currently. I haven't noticed any impact on the Chaeto growth. I did put my AI Prime Fuge back on there, and it definitely was growing better than the white strip I had on there before. So that has taken off. I do dose randomly again. Like I probably do a capful or two once a week of the Chaeto grow, and that's probably replenishing most of it. Was I low on that? Yeah, I dosed. Yeah, after I did my CP test, I was like, oh, okay, I was like a smidge low on iron and a few things, so I just dosed a little extra of it. But in general, and then I have a turf scrubber on this tank, so I have different methods on each tank just to kind of try out and play with different ones.
What's been the most effective for you so far, do you think, in terms of the turf scrubber and the Fuge versus the GFO?
They all work in different ways. So GFO is only for phosphates. Chaeto Morpha or Refugium or turf scrubber, they're going to pull out nitrous and phosphates. The turf scrubber, you get ammonia and some other stuff, will suck out. Not really a problem for a reef, but if you got a fish only system, bit of advantage. The turf scrubber is a little more high maintenance because you got to clean it every, I'm going to say 10 to 14 days. Where a Chaeto, you could ignore it for a month and it'll be fine. So it's a little more work for that. However, it contains all the light and stuff, which is nice. So it kind of keeps your sump and everything else cleaner. So it's a bit of a trade-off. It's hard to say which one's better. They both are good tools for depending on what you're after.
Have you had to dose nitrates and phosphates, or have you been able to find that happy balance where you haven't had to dose that stuff?
So my frag tank was really low, so I just started dumping extra food, and I have high nutrient issues in my other tank. So I've been trying out. What is it? I think I put the container somewhere. Yeah, so I'm trying out this stuff right now, which is interesting. It claims the fastest and most effective nitrate and phosphate remover. It's some weird, I think it's some form of carbon dosing.
No.
There's this weird sponge-looking stuff in there I threw in my filter, and I think it's just like a carbon dosing method. But that's currently in my big tank, so I'm hoping that will put a dent in my nitrates. But I have high nutrients in one tank and low in the other, so.
Well, maybe you should just kind of intermix the tank water there and solve both problems.
If there was an easy way to connect them, I would. But there's stairs and a hallway in between, and there's no easy way to connect them.
Well, you can get creative somehow there, Deven, right?
I tried. Because I wanted to hook this tank up to the water change so that I could do it both off the same reservoir.
There you go.
And
just go through the ceiling.
Yeah, but I don't know if there'd be any issues, like if the lines ever froze in the winter. I don't know. I was hesitant. I don't know how cold the attic gets, but maybe I'll test it.
Yeah.
I just couldn't find a pretty way to do it.
Well, Deven, man, it's I want to be conscious of your time here. We're about 10 after the hour here. I got a few more questions, but folks, please please chime in if you got some final questions there for Deven. What's Vermont John asking? Deven, you had a stream about Tropic Marin. How have you considered using their method?
nowhere really sells tropical marin locally, so I haven't really used them. I've looked at it a few times, but just due to lack of not conveniently available, I haven't used it. So I may eventually. Like Lou has lots. He's a founder of information, has lots of really good products, but
Gotcha.
just yeah.
All right, so we've all made mistakes in this reef keeping hobby, right? I mean, that is something I think everybody has made mistakes in this hobby, 100%. And somebody that says they've never made a mistake in this hobby is lying, in my view. But what would you say in terms of mistakes that you've made that you've learned from in this hobby? What are some of the ones that stand out to you?
Early days, using too much GFO, was stripped all my phosphates out and lost a bunch of acros. This was in my early days. So too much GFO is bad, especially when you're new. In the last year or two, I've learned my lesson of not quarantining. So I've started to quarantine, be much more cautious on that front. I got away for years without an issue, and then someone was importing some fish, and I was like, oh, that's a really cool rare angel. And it had something nasty and took out all the fish in the tank with it. So that was a very traumatic experience. Yeah. So I've learned my lesson and have since started to quarantine stuff.
Yeah, no, that is a good policy to have. What about with the new Waterbox Peninsula? If you could, would you have done anything differently with that tank?
I don't think so. I've put a lot of thought and planning into that tank. Like I've done custom sumps, I've done a ton of stuff on it, and I'm honestly really happy with how it's coming together. I wish the stand was magically bigger, like a TARDIS, so I could fit in more gear because I'm addicted to it. However, that's always the thing, is right. It's like, how can you maximize the space and still keep things looking pretty? Frag,
man, he doesn't like those softball questions I'm throwing your way.
He's like, give me this hard curveball. Do you use a lot of products? Do you discuss products that you're not fond of? Honestly, not overly. If I like a product, I will happily talk about it. If I find a product I don't like it, I usually just don't even talk about it. I'm like, nope, no publicity for you. I'm not one to like bash or down talk a company. So if I don't like it, I just won't do any content on it, pretty much. Just because, like, there's a lot of, influencer in a way, right? Like, I don't really want to, like, destroy some company because I had a bad experience, so I just avoid it.
Yeah.
But if I like it, happily talk about it and share my experience.
Yeah, I hear you. So let me ask you a general question. Calibrate the electronic. Here's a generic question. If you had to give somebody a piece of advice that's wants to kind of take their reef keeping talents to the next level, what would that advice be?
At the next level, actually test your tank. I know the older your tank gets, you become a slacker on testing, especially me, since I have automated testers, and you get used to it. You get lazy, you don't test stuff. Eventually stuff can sway because you're complacent and you're not testing stuff as much as you like to. Now, for instance, I had like the ReefBot, which was testing all my other parameters, and I had a part die in it. So I actually just replaced it today, a little actuator. So I'm going to get that back up to do my auto testing. But I realized how much of a slacker I am on testing because it's not automated anymore, and I'm used to being automated. So my elk is always automated, but the rest of it, complete slacker on testing. So I just need automation. But yeah, keep up on your testing, right? If you don't, stuff is going to sway over time. And, if your salinity is off, everything else could be off, right? So it could be just because you didn't calibrate your refractometer. And over time, stuff drifted. That's going to affect everything else. So that's a big thing, I think, is just make sure you actually, even if it's once a month, if you're new, do it once a week. If your tank's established, once a month, but just go through and do a kind of a baseline test to make sure nothing is out of whack. Just don't slack on that, and that will keep you kind of long-term right track.
Vermont John, watch ReefBum and Reef Dudes. Real advice for real people. I like that.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, a few rapid-fire questions, and we're going to wrap it up.
Okay, sounds good.
Dream tank, what's that look like?
I don't know, to be honest. Like, I love my current tank. Like, if I had endless amounts of money, I'd probably have some big, crazy in-wall tank. Actually, I don't know if you've ever seen Jimmy Pop Carlson's tank. He has, like, I don't know if it's, like, a couple 1,000 gallons, but it's this crazy, like, 20-foot racetrack tank that's in his house. Like, it would cost a fortune in freaking salt and dose and everything else, but something would be amazing. But it's way too big and extreme for my measly budget. Yeah,
well, we could always wish, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I would... if I had like unlimited means and resources and time, I'd probably do something big, crazy, and extreme.
Yeah, yeah.
For my current lifestyle, I love.
You're happy with what you've got right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Favorite SPS coral?
Oh, such a tough one. For some reason, my Palmer's Blue Milliporia, I still love that.
Oh, I love that coral.
Still one of my favorites. I really like, what's the other one? The Orange Passion. I really like that one as well.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I love that shaggy, tealy blue color of the Palmer's Blue.
Well, I might have to hit you up for a frag, or if anybody else out there has a frag. I lost mine several months ago, and that is one of my favorite. I love millies, and that is an awesome millie.
I'm a sucker for any coral with nice polyps. I just love those big shaggy polyps. Yep. It just sucks me in.
Favorite LPS coral?
I do like Gonioporas quite a bit. I always like torches. Yeah, probably.
Okay.
I don't know. It's so hard to discriminate. I like them all. There's too many nice corals. Like I couldn't do just an LPS or just an acro tank, mixed reef. Like you just can't discriminate.
You're not insulting any corals with that answer. That's a great answer.
Nope.
Last rapid fire question. Favorite fish?
I used to really love my powder blue. He was awesome. I'm sad he's gone. Jawfish makes me happy. I don't know why. I love garden eels, and he reminds me of one.
There you go.
Yep. What's yours? What's yours, actually?
What's my favorite fish?
Yeah.
I do love, well, okay, my favorite fish, and I do not have one with my tanks right now, but I am looking to put one into the new 225-gallon Peninsula tank. That would be a regal angelfish.
Nice.
A misbarred one if I could ever find one, but those are nice. Really cool looking. They really are pretty cool. I used to have one of my 225-gallon tank back in Connecticut when I used to live in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And he was pretty good. I mean, it was an SPS dominant tank. Didn't really nip at the SPS. There was I think some zoas in there that pretty much mowed down, and some LPS that could not keep in that tank with him. But yeah, it was fun in an SPS dominant tank. I think if you put and folks out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the chances are better if you put an angel like that in an SPS tank when you have more established colonies versus frags. I think with frags, there might be a greater possibility that they would develop that appetite. So,
well, a frag with a few nips might bite the dust.
Right.
A colony with a few nips might not notice it, right? So
yeah, so I have to be really patient because I was close to. I mean, one of these vendors had a regal angelfish in stock, and my tank is like 2 months old, and I was like chomping at the bit to get this. I wanted that so bad, and I was about ready to push the button on it, but I was like, all right, I got to put the brakes on this because you don't want to get in over your head, because this is a marathon, right? It's not a race, and you got to be patient, and that's one of the things I've always found in this hobby. And don't kind of like let those urges take over and rule the day.
It's true. My one slight little urge, temptation, which I was back and forth on, I added a copper band butterfly to my frag tank. And so far, he hasn't nipped anything, but I'm keeping a close eye on him. The buddy at the store said I could bring him back if he nips my coral, but I would love to throw in my big tank, but I also have like a football-sized clam in there and a few other things that would be high risk. So I'm going to, if he's behaved for a few months, he may or may not make it to the big tank later.
Yeah.
I know it's definitely a bit of a risk.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that clam. Was that raised from a pup, or was that something you brought in rather large?
That is a few tanks old now, so I don't honestly know. I bought off a buddy who was shutting down a tank who got it from another reefer that was out of town who had it for many years, so I don't know how old it is, but it is probably the size of a football. Like, it's a big clam.
Well,
so when you see the tank swing by it, they're like this, and this clam's like... So
you don't even need the Chaeto for that tank. I mean, the clam is your the nutrient export there, sucking that stuff right up.
I have 5 or 6 tangs in there, so it all adds up.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Deven, man, listen, I'm not going to keep you any longer. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you being a guest. And any final words from you?
No, thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
Yeah. Well, listen, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. This is going to be my last show for 2020. And yeah, looking forward to coming back in 2021 with more great guests. So until then, be safe, be well, and we'll see you in 2021.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
Adios.